Steph, what was kind of the vibe among the team when you got the news, and kind of take us through that process a little bit if you could?
I mean, it was a little shock for sure. We had obviously paying attention to the latest current events and kind of all the conversations around what should be done in terms of the outbreak and I think when we found out that there weren't any fans, it's kind of just you don't really know what to expect. Been in this league for a very long time and never had to deal with anything like this, so. It'll be different. It'll be weird. Obviously, understand the perspective and the decision in terms of trying to do our part to stop the spread and keep people safe first and foremost, and deal with the repercussions of what that means going forward.
What were the last 5 days or so, 6 days for you? Like, you have the comeback, and then obviously, you get the illness, and you have to be tested, and then obviously what it's now become.
I mean, it's obviously different, but again, you kind of just deal with what kind of cards you dealt with in terms of like I was excited to come back and play, and then started to feel a little under the weather, and obviously. The seasonal flu, all that type of stuff, it comes and goes for a lot of different people in different walks of life. But obviously now there's a little bit of heightened sensitivity, as there should be, with the coronavirus. So I had to go through my necessary process and steps and making sure I was all right and my family and the team and all that type of stuff. And everybody, all the experts in terms of who was in charge of that process stepped in and did all the right things.
Steph, you didn't play last night, but if you were playing before a crowd, would you feel a little at risk? Would you feel a little leery about that at this point in time?
Me personally, no. Just in terms of there's a lot of conversations around how people can protect themselves and the necessary things they should be doing on a daily basis. Obviously, there's risks anywhere you go, unless you're completely quarantined, but. Everybody has to just make the right decision for them. And I think the team is trying to do that. The city is trying to do that. We have jobs to do, and as long as there's games to be played, we're going to play them, whatever the circumstances or the atmosphere is like. But we've been educated the last week and a half on all the different ways to protect ourselves, our teammates, the practice facility, the arena, with our hygiene and things like that. So. Everybody's getting educated on that as we go along to try to get ahead of it as best you can.
You're famous, and where you go, you draw crowds.
Thanks.
I know. Where you go, you draw crowds, which kind of, I guess, put you maybe even more sketchy situations than the regular citizen. How have you had to kind of combat that, and how do you expect to have to? Do you have to like almost hide out at times?
I'm a homebody in general anyway, but a lot of stuff it's crazy just in terms of like the schedules. A lot of things have been canceled where you're supposed to hang out with fans or be at different events and things like that, and that's a necessary precaution. First and foremost, it's about protecting myself and my family and the ones that are around me the most. And so taking care of our household and things like that. But outside of that, there's been a lot of fist bumps and safe space in between, having good conversations. But other than that, it's you just have to be aware as best you can. We don't live in a bubble, but you can do things you can to protect yourself.
Steph, you guys are going obviously on a road trip coming in a few days. And a part of that road trip, you're going out of the country. You're going to be on flights. You're going to different buildings. Are you just concerned with, I guess, everyday life in that? All that comes with that, just going in different spaces and going in different environments?
It does cross your mind, just because you are, like you said, that you can't control everything. But again, it's about just being as educated as possible on what's going on. The latest, research and the patterns of how the virus is working, and again, doing your part to keep yourself and those around you as safe as possible. So, would I like to just be at home all day for 24 hours and, whatever, and quarantine myself? Maybe, but we all have to do things that we need to do, and there's people that are reliant on, the world working as it should, as best it can, and I think we're all trying to balance that. It's a tough thing for everybody. People that are out there working jobs that they can't necessarily take time off, they have to make hard life decisions. Like, there's a lot of things that everybody's dealing with in this time, and so for us to play a game, with no fans or have to travel and take certain precautions, like we'll do what we need to do and continue to just be aware of what's going on.
Going through the flu, several days of the flu can render anyone's body pretty weak. Where are you in your recovery? I know you're set to return, but what are the things that you've experienced as you get set to make another comeback to the game?
It's just an energy thing in terms of being able to exert the energy necessary to play a basketball game and still, not deplete your whole system. That was the kind of discussion before Tuesday's game or yesterday's game was I able to get up and down the floor and break a sweat and not, feel any side effects or anything like that, or feel just exhausted afterwards. And yesterday and today, getting some good workouts in were necessary and ready for tomorrow. So timing was tough. Obviously, coming back from 58 games and getting excited about getting a rhythm, and then you only get to play one and then have to miss another one. So, I'm excited to get back out there on the floor.
What are you most curious about the environment tomorrow night?
Probably just the lead up to the first 3 minutes of the game, because everything about our routines, is relying upon that kind of game day energy. Pulling up to the arena, seeing fans, outside of Chase, walking around in all the Warrior jerseys, and even the energy in the building. You can feel it all the way through the locker room, through the tunnel, and stuff like that. So once the game actually starts and you see another team out there, it'll be weird, but I think we'll kind of get into that flow fairly easily. But just that lead up to it, there's going to be a lot of big eyes out there just kind of observing how different the situation and the atmosphere is. Trying to play an actual NBA game that counts with no fans in the seats. So.
Music. There was some talk that players might want music because they're used to it.
For sure. Just try to make things as normal as possible. I remember the game in New York a couple years ago. They did kind of an old school throwback game with no PA announcer, but there were fans in the crowd. That was even weird, where you didn't have defense chants or instrumentals playing or whatever it was. So it'll be, I don't know how they're going to do it. At the end of the day, once we start playing, probably won't think about too much of that.
Is there anything that you can do to prepare for that sort of atmosphere, or talk with your teammates, or is there anything else that you can compare it to?
Nothing to compare it to, but the only thing is just try to have a conversation about how you raise your level of intensity from the jump, because you don't have that extra adrenaline rush of playing in front of 18,000 people like that. So that's really the only thing. Again, I know once the game starts, it'll be fairly easy to get into that type of flow, because the other team's going to be out here trying to beat us and vice versa. So that'll take care of itself.
I know it'll be weird circumstances, but how will it be to see Kevin back in the Bay tomorrow? Oh, he's not coming now? Oh, well, never mind.
Does he count as a fan because he's not playing? Ha.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For highlights and analysis, check out the ESPN app. And for live streaming and premium content, check out ESPN+.
Ball tournaments have been canceled, not postponed, canceled. For so many years, March Madness has been this sporting vehicle which has a magical way of bringing people together. But now with coronavirus fears increasing, bringing large groups of people together has become the last thing you want to do. For that reason, it had been decided earlier that games would be played in virtually empty arenas. Now, not even that is going to happen. Here was the statement released by the NCAA. Today, President Mark Emmert and the Board of Governors canceled the Division I men's and women's 2020 basketball tournaments, as well as all remaining winter and spring NCAA championships. This decision is based on the evolving COVID-19 public health threat, our ability to ensure the events do not contribute to spread of the pandemic, and the impracticality of hosting such events at any time during this academic year, given ongoing decisions by other entities. This has been a surreal last 24 hours, Kenny.
It really has. It's been surreal, but in the back of our minds, I think we all were saying this is a possibility. The NBA community is not immune to anything that the world is suffering from or happening to. All the time you hear about players getting the flu, getting colds. This is a strand of flu, a much more deadly strand, obviously. So no, I'm not. In the back of my mind, I always thought that this could happen. And then, Ernie and Shaq, when one player does contract it, because of in a major sport, because of the proximity of players, fans, personnel, and they're traveling from city to city, it just would make it very alarming and very difficult to contain. So kudos to Adam Silver for making that decision, just based on sheer smarts.
Yeah, he'll be joining us in just a couple of minutes, Shaq.
I mean, I think it was, the correct thing to do. I said across the hall there that, growing up as an athlete, we're always taught to just, play through it. And I'm 48 years old. I was around for the swine flu, for SARS, for the bird flu, and we all got over that. But this one, I think this one is much more deadly. So I urge people to get information about it, get the correct information about it. The times we live in now, there's more than one news source, so you don't know who's telling the truth, who's doing what. But I thought it was a great thing what Adam Silver did. Bill Russell sent out a tweet that said David Stern would definitely be proud of you. And just to jump on what Kenny said, it's the safe thing to do. We don't really have a hold on this thing yet. So I just like the word suspend rather than cancel. So the question is now, how long will we pick up when the playoffs start? But I know the powers that be are taking their time to try to get a hold of this thing, and then hopefully, the season will pick back up.
Well, I want to bring Charles into the conversation here. Charles is not here on the set with us tonight. I know that you've been under the weather, Charles, and bring us up to speed.
Well, Ernie, I spent earlier part of the week in New York City. When I got to Atlanta yesterday, I wasn't feeling well, and I talked to a couple people at Turner and a couple doctors, and they told me to self-quarantine for the next 48 hours. So I started yesterday. This is my second day. I haven't been feeling great, and they didn't want me to take any chances. So they told me to quarantine myself for 48 hours. I went and took the coronavirus test late this afternoon. I have not gotten the results back. So I'm just kind of in limbo right now. I'm hoping, and I'm really hoping it was just a bug. But like I said, I was in New York earlier this week because that was a hot spot. And when I got to Atlanta, I just wasn't feeling well. But I took the test, and I haven't gotten the results back. But that's where I'm at right now.
And we love you, Chuck. You know that, and we're praying for you. And we certainly hope that when you get the results of that test, it comes back the way we want it to, and that would be negative, obviously, man. So you hang with them, and you're going to be with us as the rest of the show goes on. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, is standing by and joins us now. And Adam, I know this is last 24 hours. You've had more than you can handle in that office. So I really appreciate you taking some time with us now. Can you kind of take me through the way Wednesday played out, culminating with you saying this is we're going to suspend the season?
Absolutely. First of all, Charles, I hope you're feeling better. I didn't even know you had a coronavirus test, and obviously I hope it comes back negative. I mean, the good news is that, especially for healthy people under 70, it's very treatable. But I think, as Kenny said earlier, that I think we're at the point now that this has been declared a pandemic, that it's virtually impossible to contain it. and it's going to become widespread. And also, as Kenny said, the NBA community is not immune, and so it's going to spread throughout our community as well. What had happened yesterday was that we had a Board of Governors meeting. It was by conference call, and some NBA League committee meetings with some groups of our owners as well. And the very purpose of the meeting was to decide what our next step should be. I had been talking to your colleague, Grant Hill, former NBA great, who's also on the board of the NCAA, and he'd been filling me in on their discussions about facing the decision as to whether they should play at that point. They have obviously canceled at this point, but whether they should play with or without fans. And some of the same experts, in particular, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who used to be the Surgeon General of the United States under Obama, was advising us both. And the truth is, up till a few days ago, or even up till yesterday, the experts were unclear as to whether, as a public health matter, NBA arenas should be emptied. I think there was a clear consensus that for people over 70 or people who have any sort of underlying ailment or a compromised immunity system, that they should not be coming. But again, it was an open issue. So we had a board meeting. We had scheduled one for Wednesday and one for today. The purpose of the one Wednesday was so that we could run through every team and get their point of view. We have some owners who have a fair amount of expertise. Mickey Arison, who owns Carnival Cruise Lines, who's dealt with these issues for years, and others who had opinions. And essentially the discussion was, should we attempt to play our games without fans in the arenas? Would that be safe? Or we should take some sort of hiatus. And then the plan was for the league office to process that information and then have another discussion today and make a decision. The call went on for several hours, and I was heading home, I think around 8 o'clock or so last night, and I got a call from the league office that we had just learned, literally is right before tip of that Utah Jazz Oklahoma City game, that Rudy Gobert, and I'm almost only saying his name because he made it public that he was one of the players that ultimately we learned tested positive, that although he had been separated from his team the day before because he had been running a fever. And once his test came back positive, we needed to make a decision whether we were then going to cancel the game. And the fans were in the seats, ready to go. We were now 5 or 10 minutes past the point we were supposed to tip. I spoke to Clay Bennett, who was there, owner of Oklahoma City Thunder, Sam Presti, the GM, and also spoke to some representatives of the Utah Jazz. And I think we quickly agreed that this should not, of course, be a business decision. We should be listening to the public health experts, Oklahoma City, and the team doctors. They conferred and fairly quickly decided we should not be playing. And then I think I officially canceled the game. And immediate issue was clearing the building of fans and not alarming anybody. And then we waited till the fans were out. And then we made that decision since I knew I'd had the benefit of several hours of meetings that day with representatives of every team on the issue of a hiatus. It seemed in that moment we made the decision that at the expiration of that last night's games, we should be taking a hiatus, knowing again we would have a chance to meet and have further discussions today. So that was the decision, as you know. Then we ended up later that night all reconvening because one of the referees at the Sacramento Kings New Orleans game had also been in touch with the Utah Jazz. That referee had had a meeting earlier in the day with the other two referees. So then we made a decision to cancel that game as well.
Adam, I want to confer with Kenny and Shaq. Say, man, we're so blessed to have you as a commissioner. You made so many great decisions. And I just want to applaud you on this one because, a lot of times in sports, money overrules all common sense. But this thing is so scary. We don't know anything about it. One thing about NBA players, we're probably the most famous people in the world. And you have so many kids and so many people coming up for you, asking for autographs, taking pictures with you. If a bunch of these players had this thing, it could be catastrophic for a lot of people.
It's a great point. I mean, of course, our concern first and foremost is for the safety of our players, our fans, everyone in this NBA community, people working in arenas. and those fans who come to our games. But to your point, when you think about a social network, we all think of social network now in terms of the internet and digital communities, but where social networks begin are people moving around. And as you guys were saying earlier, I mean, players, if you think of one of those maps in the country of where planes go, that's what players do. They move from city to city. And I think that's where, from a public health standpoint, they're particularly focused on them, because if there are clusters of this ailment and there's a cluster in one part of the country and then they get up and travel to another part, and when, as you know, when they're in those communities, they're in contact with people in the arenas, they're in contact with people in restaurants, hotels, and other places, that's how a virus can spread. I think there is an issue now in terms of how quickly this virus is spreading. It's what we have to determine is what, if anything, can be done to not necessarily stop the spread or slow it down. And again, we're relying on the public health experts. What they're telling us is that even if you can so-called shift the curve or flatten the curve, if we can push out how quickly this spreads as a public health matter, we're doing a service to the country, because particularly for old people, if a lot of people get sick quickly, we're going to run out of resources, we're going to run out of respirators, ICU beds, etc. So that the players are very unique in that situation because of the social network around them.
Adam, I think overall, what I think we all have admired and all we recognize is part of leadership is having a clear derivative and a clear direction. So for me, my question would be, what is the clear direction to say, this is going to make us play again? So what is that? What are we looking for that to happen?
Yeah, right. I just say, back to Charles's point in terms of our direction, when in the two sort of full board meetings I had yesterday and today, not one team raised money. The entire discussion was about the safety and health of the players, the community around the NBA, and our fans. And so, of course, the issue becomes now, what we determined today is that this hiatus will be most likely at least 30 days. I mean, and we don't know enough, as you've all said, to be more specific than that. But we wanted to give direction to our players and teams and to our fans that this is going to be roughly at least a month. But then the question becomes, is there a protocol, frankly, with or without fans, in which we can resume play? And I think the goal, and been talking a lot to Michelle Roberts, the Players Association, just talked to Chris Paul, the president of the union, again earlier tonight, and in coming together, what makes sense here, and without compromising anyone's safety. And I think it's frankly too early to tell. Again, it depends how quickly this virus spreads, and it also depends on what the theory is going to be and how to treat it. We may get fairly quickly to a point, you guys were mentioning flu earlier, where, well, based on everything we know, this is significantly more serious than the common flu, at least in the United States. We may ultimately get to a point where it's treated by treating symptoms in those who are sick rather than this sort of quarantine containment strategy. And that would mean, for example, if a player was running a temperature, or you, Charles, like for example, were not feeling well, you would treat that player. You wouldn't necessarily then quarantine the rest of the team. So that is something we have to look at. Again, we're conferring with all the experts, and we also recognize that because of how high profile our players are, that others in the public will take their lead from us. In fact, we don't have to talk a lot about it, and Rudy Gobert has acknowledged that he made a huge mistake by fooling around and touching the mics and all, doing that the other day when he had no idea that he had the virus. And something, we spoke to him today, in fact, about doing a public service announcement with the league, just because we know the public follows what these players do, and we want to make sure people understand how important the protocol is of washing your hands thoroughly for 20 seconds, of not touching your face, after you've washed your hands, about maintaining social distance in certain situations. So we actually think we can use this hiatus to use this platform we have on social media to help people deal with this disease.
So when you were making the decision last night, you used the word suspend. What was your thought process in saying, okay, we're going to suspend the rest of the league as opposed to cancel the rest of the season?
You know, the thought process, first of all, I mean, this was a split-second decision, so that was the word I chose in the moment. It may be a better word that could have been used, but I also felt at the same time that given, unlike, you know, the Final Four, which is the month of March, as you guys well know, our season, you know, goes well into June, and I was also thinking at the time, and I had talked to our television partners, the folks at Turner, you know, and ESPN about ABC about possible contingencies. We recognized that there was a chance we might be stopping the season. And I think everybody, especially in a crisis like this, indicated absolute willingness to work together. Again, and we had already met yesterday with the Players Association as well before we knew anything about a positive test. So my thinking, Shaq, was, you know, even if we're out for a month, even if we're out for 6 weeks, we could still restart the season. You know, it might mean that then the finals take place in July, you know, late July. Just my feeling was it was way premature to suggest that we had lost the season. It's and again, you know, it may seem odd at the same moment that we're saying for health reasons we need to take a break to talk about restarting it, and that the notion of at least 30 days was just to try to give people some guidance. I mean, I'll say one thing: it's remarkable to be here talking to you guys tonight about this hiatus when it was only yesterday that first the NCAA made that decision to play without fans, which seemed, you know, was unprecedented, was a historic decision, and we were having the same discussion to be jumping here one day later, and I think it only makes the point that on this issue and all the things we've all dealt with for so many years, you know, you could say, well, it changes day by day. This literally changes hour by hour in terms of what we know. So it was really a moment for us to step back, take a breath, ensure that everyone in the NBA community was safe and healthy and doing everything they needed to do to care for their families, and then give us some time to deliberate and figure out if there's a way that we can resume playing at some point.
Adam, is it possible that the season will not continue?
Of course it's possible. I mean, I just don't know more at this point. I mean, there's another factor, that may go to the seasonality of this virus. Again, you know, I've talked to a lot of experts. It's a little clear. Some have a theory that it's just as with the common flu, as the weather changes, we may see it begin to peter out a little bit. I mean, again, we don't know. So, you know, at this point, we're just waiting. You know, one of the things we want to do during this hiatus, and this is one of the things, I had a meeting with our general managers and team presidents late this afternoon by conference call to talk about how are we going to use this time, decisions as to whether the players will stay in market. Understandably, some of the players may play in a market, but their families may live in another city. Will they be rejoining their families? What's the best way to keep them safe? You know, what's the best way to keep them in shape? You know, all those things are still on the table because this has happened so quickly.
Adam, you've been more than gracious with your time tonight. We truly appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. And we'll stay in touch. And again, well done on doing something that's nobody wanted to see, but nobody can really argue with, given the magnitude of this situation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ernie, and feel better, Charles.
Thank you.
We will take a break. Another facet of this story is the fact that you have so many employees working games around.
And that ends tomorrow, but I took the test late this afternoon.
Dr. Gupta, how about I know the testing has been a point of contention, certainly in the coverage of the coronavirus, about the availability of it, et cetera. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah. Well, can I just say to Charles first? I mean, because I consider Charles a friend, and Charles, I'm sorry that you're not well. I hope that you feel better. I mean, this is, I think, frightening for a lot of people to hear of people we know becoming sick. And the chances are, Charles, thankfully, that you will, whatever this is, regardless of whether it's flu or coronavirus. It sounds like it wasn't flu. Sounds like you got tested for that and it wasn't flu, but. The chances are, statistically, you're going to recover and be fine, but I know it can be really tough. So just want to say that I'm thinking of you. The tests are hard to come by. I mean, look, and this is something that we've been talking about for some time, for several weeks now, talking about the fact that the testing just seems to be inadequate in this country. And look, we can look in other countries around the world to get an idea of what's possible. In even South Korea, they were testing some 10,000 people a day. And for a while here, we were testing, hundreds possibly total, over a long period of time. The reason it's so important is without doing surveillance, sort of understanding, having eyes on the issue as people have framed it, we don't really know how to tackle this problem. We don't know how significant the problem is now. Charles just mentioned New Rochelle. I was in New Rochelle today looking at the hospital system over there. New Rochelle is considered the largest cluster of patients with this virus in New York State, but we don't, and it's 148, but it could be 10 times that. We just don't know. So the tests have been a problem. And I'll tell you, there's so much to say about this, but I'll tell you that for the first time really today, in one of the committee hearings, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the guy we all turn to, said, look, it's been a failure. He used that word. It's been a failure. How hard does that hurt to describe our public health system having failed in this regard? But it's true.
Dr. Gupta, this is a two-part question. We hear about even, our comrade Charles getting tested and things of that nature. One, should we all just go get tested in generality? Two, and on the common flu of the strand that we hear typically, there's a time when they say you can't spread it anymore. As you get better, you can't spread it. Is there a cutoff date? And again, should we all just go get tested?
Yeah, so Kenny, with the first question, I don't think that everyone needs to go out and get tested, and there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, one of them is the obvious one, there's just not enough tests. But the other thing is that, for people who have symptoms, who have some sort of known exposures to someone who's known to have the virus, that puts them in a different group. But without that, if you go to the doctor and you have symptoms, like Charles did, the first thing they're probably going to do is test you for the flu, because that's still far more common. So you want to rule out the flu first, and then if that comes back normal or negative, then you can get tested for the coronavirus. I don't think we're suggesting that people should all start going to their doctors and just getting tested just to find out for their own sake. There's really not a lot of value in that. At some point, I'll tell you as well, Kenny, that once it's established that the virus is really here and circulating a lot, testing may actually not be as helpful at that point, because at that point we've established that the virus is really spreading in the country, and there's no particular importance to test you, because we're not going to do anything different for you. There's no particular medication or something like that to give. As far as how long you're contagious, this is really interesting, and I think an important point is that there's some evidence that even before you develop symptoms and after your symptoms are gone, you could still spread the virus. This is contagious, and when they say spread, the way that they measure that is they say, how many people am I likely to spread it to? And with this particular new coronavirus, it's 2 to 3 people you'd spread it to, whereas with flu, it's one other person. That's why they call this so much more contagious.
Dr. Sanjay, this is Shaq. How are you, sir?
Hey, Shaq. I'm doing well.
As you know, in 2004, we had SARS, 2008, the bird flu, 2010, swine, MERS, Ebola, Zika, in 2018, Ebola again. What makes this one different than any of the other ones?
Well, there could be some similarities, especially with things like SARS, because they're both the same family of viruses. I think what's different about this, you look at this compared to the other flus, H1N1 or H5N1, the swine flu or bird flu, any of those. When we think about the seasonal flu, the one that we're used to, one of the things they try to measure, Shaq, is what's called the fatality ratio. How likely is this to lead to someone dying? And with flu, that number is about 0.1%. It means 0.1% of the people who get the flu die from it. People don't realize that sometimes in this country, but tens of thousands of people do die of the flu every year. 2 years ago, 60,000 people died of the flu in the United States alone. With this, Shaq, this appears to be anywhere between 10 to 20 times more lethal than that flu. So if you start looking at the numbers, 60,000 people died 2 years ago. If this is 10 times more lethal, you're talking 600,000 people. So that's one of the big concerns. And that's just the United States numbers I'm talking about here, not even around the world. That's what they're trying to prevent. That's what's getting all the public health officials' attention. You have a contagious virus that is circumnavigating the globe. and it is more lethal than the flu, significantly more lethal. That's why the public health officials want to try and slow the spread of this, allow hospitals to have enough resources and staff and supplies to take care of the patients. If all these patients come in at once, the hospital systems are going to be overwhelmed. So that's what they're trying to avoid.
Do you think, this is Charles, do you think this thing going to get worse before it gets better? I hate to ask that question, but it's a fair question.
It is a fair question, and the answer is yes. I mean, I want to give you an honest answer, Charles. Some of it is because, you know, when you saw what happened in China, you saw some of the containment efforts, the largest quarantines ever recorded in human history have happened over the last 3 months. 60 million people on quarantine. Now, same sort of thing in Italy. These are aggressive measures, but one of the things that's done, it's not stop this. You can't stop this, but you can slow it down. But it does mean the virus is coming to this country. It's here in this country, and it is circulating. The other thing is, I think what we're going to see, Charles, over the next few days, maybe week or so, are these sudden increases in numbers. And that doesn't necessarily reflect that suddenly a lot more people got infected. I think what it reflects is that the testing is finally going to catch up in this country. We've been really behind. As the tests get out there, a lot of people are going to find out that they, in fact, have this. And they'll be surprised that they have it. They think, how did I get this? I have no idea. But the fact is the virus is circulating in these communities, and people are getting infected that just don't know it yet. So the numbers are going to get worse, Charles, before they get better, sadly.
Dr. Gupta, you joined me and Charles on our podcast the other day, and we spoke for about 20 minutes. And during that conversation, I asked you, now, what's your best advice for the average American in terms of, you know, flying and in terms of being with other people and washing your hands and that kind of thing? Has your best advice to the average American changed over the last week or so?
I don't think my advice has changed to the average American. I think that, you know, 80% of us, 80% of people who live in the United States, around the world, if they get infected with this virus, they may get sick, but they'll recover. And you know, they're going to be fine in the long run. I'll tell you, Ernie, I talk to my parents every day. They're in their late 70s. They live in Florida. And it really struck me as everyone's been talking about this. We always focus on the good. The 80% are going to be okay, probably. But there is 15 to 20% of people who are very vulnerable right now. And this is to answer your question. My advice hasn't changed, but I will say this, that we all have an obligation now to take care of each other. And I don't want to sound, you know, Pollyannish in some way about this, but how I behave, probably more than any other time in my life, influences your health. And how you behave influences my health. If you are actually doing all the things we talk about in terms of hygiene, about staying inside if you're sick, about, you know, not spreading this virus in some way, that makes a difference, not just to you in terms of keeping you healthy, but to me and to all the people around you. And I was thinking about, I want to visit my parents and spend time with them, but I also know that I was just in New Rochelle, and if I have this virus, I would hate to have spread it to them. So I got to think of myself as potentially harboring this virus and not spreading it to people. So keeping my distance, not shaking hands with people. And just, you know, the obligation is not just to myself, but it's to everyone around me. And I think I think that applies to all of us. I know it applies to all of us.
I would like to also follow up with that in terms of, we see a lot of people with the mask on, we see people with gloves and hand sanitizer. You did say it on the steam room. Could you give kind of a layman's guide to walking around the world today?
Sure. I mean, one of the big things that comes up is masks, and I think, you know, people often gravitate toward the masks. I've seen this as I've covered these types of stories all over the world because people want a sense of control. The surgical masks that you see many times people wearing, they're just not going to stop the virus. I mean, a virus is a little strand of genetic material. It can get around the mask. It can even get through the mask, depending on what kind of mask it is. Sometimes if it gets stuck to the mask, then people take off their mask, they actually contaminate themselves. So people have found that healthy people who are trying to prevent getting infected by wearing a mask can actually increase their chances of getting infected. It's counterintuitive, but true. I think for someone who's known to be sick, who's coughing, sneezing, first advice is they shouldn't go out because, you know, again, you have an obligation not to infect other people. If you have to go out, that might be a time to wear a mask. But, I talk about the hand sanitizer and the hand washing. Sometimes I feel silly saying this stuff in the middle of a pandemic because people say that's all you got, hand washing makes a difference. We've stopped pandemics for hundreds of years through these simple, basic hygiene measures. Your hands are one of the ways that you transmit the virus. It's one of the ways that you contaminate yourself. So keeping clean makes a big difference. I don't know if you know this, Kenny, but humans started shaking hands to basically gain trust. Shook hands and you showed that you didn't have a weapon, right? That's how people knew. Problem is nowadays, Kenny, the virus is kind of a weapon, and you may be transmitting it to somebody without even knowing it. So simple things like that go a long way towards breaking the cycle of transmission of the virus. And I'm very optimistic and hopeful that that will make a big difference in bringing these numbers way down.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta, very nice of you to spend time with us tonight. I know you've got another town hall on the coronavirus tonight with Anderson Cooper. Encourage everybody to check that out on CNN at 10 o'clock. But thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
You got it. Thanks for having me. Good luck.
Certainly. Canceling sporting events, school, office work, etc. What we really need to do, what we really need to cancel is 2020.
No, not at all, brother. I'll take my 9 months chances.
Grant Hill will join us next here on Inside the NBA.
I have been on quite a few emergency board calls, both with the NCAA and with the Atlanta Hawks. And, it's been challenging. It's been extremely difficult. And I think as it relates to the NCAA, it was about doing the right thing. We had a number of medical advisors that have been on this for the last month, giving us advice, watching this coronavirus, and really making recommendations to the Board of Governors and ultimately to the staff, the executive team at the NCAA. And I can tell you when yesterday, and obviously, I want to respect the confidentiality of the board, but when the recommendation was made by one of our fellow independent directors, Vivek Murthy, who was also the former U.S. Surgeon General during the Obama administration, no one objected. It was unanimous that at least yesterday, the idea of having a spectator-free tournament, was agreed upon. And at the time, that was radical. And I think all of us felt very good about that decision. And, we felt we were making a bold move. And as Adam Silver and Dr. Gupta mentioned in their previous segments, this thing has accelerated so rapidly. And that decision that we made yesterday at around 3 o'clock felt like last week, because this thing is changing, by the hour, by the minute. And of course, the unfortunate circumstances with Rudy Gobert and the Utah Jazz, and then ultimately the decision by the NBA last night. We were able to reconvene and, go through contingency plans, talk about possibly postponing, but ultimately none of that was practical. And we all unanimously felt, in spite of all the implications around, that this was the right thing to do.
Grant, from an athletic standpoint, I think if you look at even the risk factor that college students who are around, 22,000 a lot of times daily, the risk that would have posed, even though it was a spring break opportunity, I think
I don't think we can think that far ahead right now. I think we're, just sort of trying to sort of deal with what's happening right this moment. And certainly not just canceling the men and women's NCAA tournament. We had 7 winter championships that were all beginning to sort of happen right now. We also have the spring season that was beginning to begin for spring sports, and ultimately later on this spring championships. And so, we had to eliminate that. Also, too, you think about the other sports, think about basketball and football, recruiting. And obviously the AAU season. I know you've had children who've been in the AAU circles, and the recruiting and the travel that is associated with recruiting. All of that has been shut down for right now. I think the sports world is like the rest of the world, where Even though we may have access to, some great medical experts, we're still sort of in uncharted territory, and trying to sort of figure this out ourselves, and trying to anticipate what this looks like tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now. So I'll be honest, and certainly I'm sure there's been some discussion on the staff level, but I don't think we projected that far ahead, and I think it's the unusual nature of these particular times that we're in.
Hey, Grant, Charles here. Some of the smaller tournaments started last week, and then we've already played a couple games in the last 48 hours before we cancel the rest of the season. What's the protocol to get all those kids tested from last week going forward?
Well, as Dr. Gupta talked about, look, I think one of the issues is that we've been woefully inadequately in terms of having tests, and obviously, I've heard talks of the state of North Carolina or the state of Louisiana having less than 100 test kits for this coronavirus. And so I think that has sort of hindered us in a way. And, certainly we can learn from, South Korea and China, and obviously containment is the first response. And now we're in that mitigation process as a country. And so it's certainly sports taking a role with our leadership. But, we don't know. That's the thing. We don't know. And certainly there are 500,000 student athletes in the NCAA. When you look at all the divisions, Divisions 1, Divisions 2, and Division 3. I'm even thinking as an Atlanta Hawk player, we don't have the capability right now to test all our guys. Obviously we're emphasizing the importance of social distancing. Our players are at home. We're asking them to wash their hands, make wise decisions, don't be in crowds, and trying to educate them as we've been over the course of the last few weeks on this. But there's still a lot of the unknowns that are out there, Charles, and I wish I had a more definitive answer to your question.
Grant, real quick, in the last 45 seconds or so we have of this segment, I know there had to be, even though this was the right decision to make by the NCAA to cancel this tournament, there had to be part of you. With your history with that tournament, Kenny's played in it, Shaq, Charles, you know what it means to a young man to play in that tournament. That had to be part of this that really broke your heart.
It definitely broke my heart, and certainly all of you, we all know how special it is. We cover it for a living. It's a time of the year we all look forward to. I will say this, Ernie, in closing. We are in some remarkable and some radical times. And, we're experiencing things that we never could have imagined or even accepted. And I think the one thing, if you look at the two universal languages, you look at music and you look at sport, and their ability to unify and bring people of race, of religion, different ethnicities together. And I am so proud of the sport community and the leadership in the sport community for communication, for collaboration, for cooperation, for making bold and decisive decisions, very tough decisions, and ultimately, in a way, being the cultural proxy for good behavior. And obviously, Kenny, Charles, Shaq are athletes like myself. Ernie, your entire adult life, you've been around sports as a wonderful sports broadcaster. So we understand the power and the impact of sports, but the manifestation of leadership at all levels, the professional level, Adam Silver, the NBA, the NCAA, Major League Baseball, you can go down the list. MLS, as you mentioned earlier, Ernie, everyone working together and really representing what being a global citizen is all about. So I'm just proud and grateful and thankful for that leadership. And it's difficult times, but it's comforting to know that ultimately we're doing the right thing.
Grant, well said. And thank you so much for spending time with us tonight here on Inside the NBA. We'll be right back. Back here inside Studio J as we wrap up Inside the NBA on a night when there were no NBA games as the season has been suspended. I want to thank the Commissioner, Adam Silver, for joining us, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Grant Hill, for all of their input and all of their insight tonight. And Charles, want to thank you for joining us on the phone in a difficult time. And for those who are just tuning in, and you revealed that you have been tested for the coronavirus, so waiting the results of that. And, we just send you nothing but our sincere good thoughts and prayers, man.
Well, man, I appreciate it, man. You know, I love you three guys. I wish I was there. But I want to say, I want to give my best to Rudy Gobert. I know a lot of people are piling on him for what happened. He made an honest mistake. And Kenny and Shaq know we all touch each other's stuff every single day when you're on an NBA team. That's the best thing about playing, screwing around with your teammates. And I know he feels awful, and I just want to give him my best.
And we hope that, as Adam Silver pointed out, too, that they can find a way that Rudy Gobert can use that regrettable episode for a greater good and to kind of get the message out about taking this seriously.
Yeah, I just think that overall, for me, the show is super informative with Adam Silver and Dr. Gupta and Grant as well. Just super informative. You know, a lot of times, we're here and we get a lot of the hijinks. You remember, we're going to see Shaq falling over, we pushing him in the Christmas tree. But a lot of times people forget about the Kobe, night. They'll forget about when civil rights, when we have, we're talking about all of different things during Martin Luther King's birthday, talk about Trayvon Martin. We have all of these subjects that sometimes gets missed. This is one of those moments for me.
Exactly.
To just inform, because I think, and I'll speak for us, I've always come to this show because I feel I can trust what's being said here. And I hope that people at home can feel that same way.
What I know about us, what I know about this country is when you back us against the wall, we rise. I love seeing people compete. I know right now it's some guys not watching the show, they're in the laboratory trying to figure something out. I'm just, very optimistic about that. I just hope, some pharmaceutical company comes with something very quick. Because, again, I'm 47 years old. I've seen this
48,
before.
That's right.
I'm 48. So I've seen this before, not of this magnitude, but I've been around SARS, swine, bird flu, MERS. But this one is a little different. So I just want to urge all the scientists and all the guys, the pharmaceutical companies, keep working. We love you guys, and I know you guys are gonna come up with.
Got our picture on them here.
Oh, whoa, these are kind of cool.
Where are we?
Oh, yeah, they do. Kenny, you giving me your balls, too, because you don't play golf.
Yeah. So there's that.
Thank you, Ken.
And got
That's really cool.
My favorite
There,
number
Chuck.
32 on there.
I'll take one set. You can have the rest.
Thank you.
I'm the only one play golf, me and you, Ernie.
Charles, one thing, be gentle with my balls. Okay.
This is mixed up for my my PlayStation.
Hey, look.
I'm not grabbing his balls. You grab them.
Go ahead. You just go ahead. They're going to stay right there. You can have them yourself.
If you want them, you grab them yourself. Ernie, Chuck's grabbing my balls. Hey, give me my balls. Hey, Kenny and Shaq, thanks for the balls.
Is this like 10th grade or am I shooting too high? Lower?
Hey, thanks, Ken.
7? 6th grade. Okay. 5th grade.
Hey,
listen. Shaq than a fool.
They know, oh my gosh.
Got a lot of balls to talk.